Hello, hello. Welcome to #DigLeadBookClub. My name is Josie Alquist, and I am the little but mighty author of this book up here, Digital Leadership in Higher Education. And I'm also celebrating today. This is the first time that I believe LinkedIn Live should be magically working. And so hello, especially if you are joining live on LinkedIn. This is also streaming on Twitter, on YouTube, and my Facebook page. So we just share all the love everywhere out on the internet as we do. I have been doing these live streams for the last month, bringing on folks that have been featured in the book, and not to give you an infomercial or to do a live reading, but to just get conversating about and getting to know them, but also to unpack what it really means to discern and express and activate leadership today, especially in digital platforms. So if you are joining me live or even in the recording, let me know about it. Say hello in the comments wherever you are logging in from. And if you've got questions for my very special guest today and please let us know about that too. Or if there's anything that you're like, yeah, totally, absolutely, give us, some good old emoji jazz hands or hip hop hands or whatever you think those hands are. You drop those in the comment. So if you joined last week where I talked with Mordecai Brownlee, before I brought him on, I did an unboxing as, YouTubers do. I'm not a YouTuber, but I opened the book for the very first time from my publisher, and it was the hardback, and I didn't know for sure what the hardback was going to be, and it wasn't what I expected. So we're going to do a do-over, and I do know that the books that have arrived are the paperback. And so again, before I bring my guest on today, we're gonna open up the books that I just received a couple days ago on my front porch. And I know anytime I get something in the mail, because my dogs absolutely lose their minds with barking, as dogs do. And of course, this box is like very well taped. So excuse me while I set it down. All right, unbox. I should have cut it before. Okay, exciting bubble wrap. This is really special material in here. And I did get to have two. So I get to lift up both of them and not the receipt. So this is the book in the flesh. And it's so cool to be able to hold these and have them. You only need one copy, and you can get it on Kindle too. This is the whole big old thing. My mom was so funny. She's like, Josie, it's bigger than I thought it was going to be. I was like, goodness, for the 4 years I worked on this thing, it better be bigger than one might expect, right? So super fun to be able to do that. Thanks everybody, especially on LinkedIn, for saying hello. Thanks for joining us. And again, so cool. This is the first time we've gotten to stream live on LinkedIn with a little bells and whistles we had to do behind the scenes. So that's enough of my little show at the beginning here. If you haven't learned too much about the book, you can head to my website, josiealquist.com, and then it's /digital leadership. You can also just type in digital leadership in higher ed into Amazon or into the magics of Google and find the website there to get you a copy. So as I said, this book club live series is to feature not just the author talking away, but the core of the book is people, and featuring real people living out their values and what is important to them in digital spaces. And today I get to bring on to our live stream Pearson, who not only is living authentically, but she's also teaching about digital identity and leadership, and is a future digital scholar doing research around social media. And we've got to work on a number of different projects together recently. And again, she is featured in the book. And so I'm excited to welcome on Pearson.
Hello.
Hi. So good to see you.
Oh, good to see you as well.
We talked a lot this summer, like probably twice a week.
Yes.
Because we taught a course together at Florida State called Technology in Higher Ed. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a little bit. But it was really cool to get to collaborate with you in that way. And then here today, talking about the book. So you're logging in from Florida State, Tallahassee, and
Yep.
I've done work with Florida State for a number of years. And so folks typically think that's where I am. And I always have to clarify. I'm logging in from LA because we get to do a lot of this kind of work wherever we are. So cool. Well, I want to dig in right away with you, get into the heart of the matter. Because that's also how you especially can use Twitter often. Every single person in the book, I ask them, what is your why for leading online? And I'm not picking favorites, but yours was one of my favorites. So I'm going to read it. And if you could just like kind of let us know a little bit more about you based upon the answer that you provided. So you said, I lead online because I lead in person. I am holistic, multifaceted, and authentic in person. So why not be that way online? I challenge social norms, privilege, and oppression in person. So why not do that online?
Yeah, absolutely. That sounds like something I reread it recently and I said that absolutely sounds like me. So I'm glad that it does. But I have been in higher education since I began undergrad and have had access to social media platforms from a very young age before they were, I guess, kind of considered these tools to educate and connect. And so my thought process was I've been on them so long that I have really grown up and matured and what I'm talking about and what I'm sharing. And so my thought process is there's no reason to be a different person online than there is in person. And having just the opportunity to share more about my thoughts and insights and different things like that. I think one of the things that I often think about is like I'm not apolitical on my social medias because my life is not apolitical, right? Like I'm a Black woman and that existence is very radical. And so I share my opinions and I let people know where I am and where I stand on things and what are those important like values to me. I'm a lot of different things to a lot of different people, right? And so I think about how, like, I don't want to do anything that's going to embarrass my mom. I am a avid Christian and want to make sure that I'm representing myself well that way. I'm very passionate about the work that I do as a student affairs professional. So of course I'm going to just tweet about student affairs and talk about those different things. And so I recently became a runner. And so I talk about running and I talk about wellness. And so if I'm all of those things in my everyday life, then I'm also going to be all of those things on my platforms and being able to talk through those things. And you never like really know like who you're reaching and what you're sharing that may have an impact on somebody else, whether it's like new knowledge. I was on Instagram yesterday, and I haven't voted yet. I will, but someone shared about the different like amendments that are going to be on the Florida ballot, and I was like, "Thank you so much for sharing this," because the reason I had not gone to early votes yet is because I was like, I need to read up on these amendments a little bit more, and so then I shared it, and then I was scrolling through, and like I saw other people share, and I was like, okay, great, I'm not the only one that wasn't quite well versed on what amendments were going to be on the ballot. And so really just opening up and sharing who I am online, as well as who I am in person.
Awesome. Well, and that's one of the stories that I talked about in the book. And I told you again, this is not a quiz. No one even listening or that I
I have the book, so I read it.
Yeah, right. Again, it's not, like it's not a quickie. I mean, you can get through it, but there's photos and there's activities. So one of the stories that I talked about that you shared with me is because you approached these platforms through authenticity and your identity, and being even involved within like Black Twitter and documenting your Black identity, you were posting not even necessarily with the intent that I want my students to see this or I wouldn't. It wasn't either. It was just, this is me. But that turned into a conversation with the student, because you work in new student programs, both developing student leaders, but also like the thousands of new students and transfer students to Florida State. FSU is a very, very large campus. So and it led to deeper conversations about identity. A lot of times we hear like, it's almost like these things live in vacuums. What happens on Twitter is just there, and we can have opinions about it. Or like, I know we have a lot of people here on LinkedIn, but you had this example of IRL, in real life, that was even deeper about identity expression. So if you could maybe just tell us a little bit more about that, and again, why you choose to use maybe social media platforms to also bridge connections with those that you serve, and for you that tends to be a lot of students.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's really important for our students to just see us engaging in very real things, right? So I talked a little bit about like, I am multiple things to multiple people. So yes, I am an educator, but it's not the only thing that I am. And so as I have navigated social media, I've definitely had students where like, they were just like, I didn't know that you had an opinion about that, or I didn't know that you and I shared that perspective, or that you understood what this might be. And so really being able to say like, yes, I actually do have an opinion about this, and this is where I am, and tell me what your thoughts are. And I think that allows our students to really get to know us and understand how they can also show up in multiple ways, because a lot of times those things are really important to them. And so it's kind of like what's happening in higher education right now, of like, students want to know where you stand on things. They want to know what your insights, they want to know if they are safe with you, and if their identities are safe with you. And so that particular student, honestly, sometimes I'm like, I don't even know what tweet they're talking about, because I do tweet a lot. And so sometimes they'll come and talk to me, and I'm like, what are you talking about? I tweeted that a week ago. I forgot. And so having them just have conversations about like, well, I saw that you posted about this, and I want to know a little bit more. I want to understand a little bit more about your perspective, or I know that I now can come talk to you about this particular thing, and I can seek guidance from you because you're keeping up with what's happening in the world. And I know that this thing is also weighing on you. So even though the example that I gave you was from back in 2017, I've talked very openly about how Breonna Taylor's murder has impacted my life, and that has allowed my Black women students to openly talk about how it's impacting their life as well, and how they're processing those things. And so I think it's really important to just be able to highlight that like I'm a human with emotions, that I have perspectives, and you can absolutely come and talk to me about those things, and talk to me about my identities, and I can talk about how to best support your identities. Something that me and one of my best friends talk about a lot is like really being supportive of other people's identities, in the sense of like, no, when I say I'm supportive, like I'm saying I will fight for you as well. And so being able to keep up with those things of even identities that I don't necessarily hold, making it clear that like I support you and I'm going to have your back. And that's definitely helped me navigate more relationships. I mean, I know now, like in COVID, like everything is kind of online, but I think that it has helped students who maybe wouldn't have originally felt as open to come and start up a conversation, be willing to say, well, like, I saw she tweeted about this. And I always tell people that if I tweeted about it, it is open game to have a discussion about it. If I put it out there in the world, like, it is, you are open to come and talk to me about it, or ask me about it, or engage in a deeper conversation. And that has happened more times than I can count. And I'm glad that usually it's for a positive reason, and positively trying to understand just the different perspectives that people have.
Yeah. I love that you're just kind of giving them a menu of conversation starters. Like, these are things that are important to me or that are on my mind right now. In student affairs, we kind of like joke fun about like icebreakers or whatever, but how these, and it could be about you going running. And I give the example a lot to especially campus leaders, like, post a photo of your dog, like it will go far, or your hobbies. But I also appreciate how you shared, how you posted often about Breonna Taylor and the impact of your life, but also actions other people should take. And not just what we see, but as you just shared, that you have an outpouring of other women students reaching out to you, then being able to have those conversations. Because it's important for us, and as a researcher, being able to tell that back end story that we might not see what happens because you posted this thing. I mean, for me, I was mostly jealous of all of your running photos, but and so I would need it because I couldn't run all summer because I was injured. But I know, like, every time that you were posting about Breonna, I was reminded, okay, have I donated? What have I done? And again, I just want to acknowledge you for that. And that was on Instagram stories, honestly, is where I would see a lot of that kind of content. So I appreciate it. And kind of realizing, no, you're in Florida, I'm in LA, much different cultures and student populations. I also think there is value, as you said, in sharing a little bit of your values, your thoughts, to still have open dialogue with students or staff that don't see that vantage point. I think there's value in that too. I think a lot of times in higher ed student affairs, we think that then is alienation. So anyway, that's my thoughts. That's my pulpit about that. So another piece of the book is about being clear and understanding also, and it's listed in your why statement, of leadership theories as we currently know them. And you talked about how authentic leadership is a driving force in your life that influences your use of online spaces. I don't know if you want to talk just a little bit more about maybe even, or if you want to talk beyond authentic leadership theory, if there's other theories because my whole thing has always been, what can we take we know in scholarship, in research, and see it in action in digital spaces. So again, you're in your doc program. I feel like we can geek out a little bit. And so that's where that question's coming from.
Yeah, absolutely. I really value authenticity, but I also feel like I also have like this little like twitch that happens when people say authenticity, because the question is, well, who gets to be authentic, and then who gets to decide if that authenticity is professional, and what is and what isn't. And so I think for me it is consistently showing up in the same way. And so I actually was talking to a student, or we were getting ready for an application, and it really touched my heart. But she was talking about what her definition of professionalism is, and learning that professionalism can also be purple lipstick and dyed hair. And I like kind of perked up and was like, I think she's talking about me. And so really recognizing that presence is also really important to students. And so reconstructing, like, yes, that is me being authentic, but that's also reconstructing what it means to be professional, and understanding what professionalism is. I also think that conversation of, like, we all talk about politics, we talk about race, things are considered unprofessional. No, we can talk about those things, have a very good conversation about them and ensure that like our identities are fully represented. So like when we say authentic, it's not just one person gets to be authentic in one particular part of their identity, but being authentic in all parts of their identities and all of themselves that they can bring to the table.
Mm-hmm. I appreciate you noting that the layers of complexities, especially in identity, but also in position, a title within higher ed. We are one big old wrapped up bureaucracy that, wants control and status and that has to be stated obviously. Someone asked me, well, what's the next book you're going to write? And I also kind of like wanted to punch him in the face. Can't do that usually. So I like gave him a little side eye because I can hardly blog right now, let alone write another book. But I do think another book should be written for grads, new professionals, mid-level, especially marginalized identities through this lens. Look at who wrote the book. Like I included so many voices that I could, but I also knew it's to anyone, but there is a very clear message for executives, but not only, right? And I do think you hit exactly on what would need to be, honestly, at the heart of that is navigating and or dismantling a little bit of that. A lot of the people, executives that I love to feature, I feel like they are redefining what a VP will and should look like, both do online, but also physically what they look like and what they do. So anyway, that was kind of something else that I felt like.
Well, whenever you're ready to write that next book, I'm sure.
You write it.
Oh my goodness, you sound like my grad. Every time she's like, you need to write a book, I said, I need to write a dissertation.
This is true. I totally get it. Yeah. Okay. Well, so on that topic, uniquely, and maybe it's not unique, I don't know. So I was invited to create a course at Florida State called Technology in Higher Ed. I think there's only like 2 courses out there like it in higher ed programs. It's for grads and docs. And you were one of the students, and we already knew each other at that point. But then this last summer, we taught together as co-instructors, which I was like, why would I ever teach any other way? Love and write a book. That was also when someone asked me what I'm going to write next. I'm like, well, I have to find who my co-authors are next because I'm not writing a book alone again.
I volunteer.
Yeah. So I was just curious because I've taught it a few years, and goodness, like the course ended beginning of August. I feel like you and I haven't even been like, so how was that? Like, what did you think? Because August, September, October, and so the course is about technology, but it relies heavily on exploring and navigating our individual as humans in higher ed and digital identity and leadership and reputation, and then the impact we want to make for ourselves, but also in the organizations that we work in. So I was just curious, like, what were some things that were maybe surprising to you on the back end now as an instructor trying to teach digital leadership to future leaders who are currently in their grad or doc programs?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it was really interesting. I'm not gonna lie to you, the grading was always really interesting. So I was like, how do I keep track of, and I think we even had a student ask of like, how are y'all keeping track of all of this? And we were like, a very, very big spreadsheet.
Yeah, so to be fair, Twitter was part of the course, and so students were graded based on participation. We did a live Twitter chat where they had to tweet like dozens and dozens of times, and so I think that was it. They're like, how are you going to track this?
But I also think it was or at least for me, it was about, they probably always knew when I was sitting down to grade it, because I would try to respond and actually engage with the content that they were having. And so I do think that that's an important aspect of, like, if you're going to have a course where we're talking about digital leadership and we're talking about how to use these platforms, that it's not just us just like checking a box of like, okay, you tweeted today, but like making sure that like we are reading and like going back and like having like intentional conversations and responses to what they're saying and how they're engaging in the content. So that was always really fun to me because I was learning with them through what they were talking about and the things that they were sharing. But also just it was fascinating to see folks really building their digital identity and determining like what is it that they wanted to talk about, how did they want to be perceived. I think probably my favorite week was when we talked about audience and just like who is it that we're talking to when we are putting out our information, how our audience is. So we did the Dolly Parton challenge to kind of think through our different audiences of like, well, when we're tweeting, who are we tweeting? Or when we are putting up a Facebook status or we are on other platforms, like who is our intended audience and how do we think that they're interpreting that message? And honestly, it made me think about who my audience was and what I was sharing and how that was being perceived. Because I know that I definitely tweet about the most random things sometimes. And then sometimes I'll tweet about an article or homework or something related, but just really having like a very diverse platform. So that was a lot of fun to talk about audience and to see what their interpretations were. It was great to see people who had like never been on Twitter or on a lot of platforms. And so like as a person who's been there, like for 10 years I feel like since the platform started, I was like, this is so interesting to watch people from the very beginning. And so we like had them talk through like, well, who are you following? Who did you decide to follow? Why did you decide to follow those people? Because I know now I go through my followers and I'm like, wow, I followed this person 5 years ago, or I followed them, 7 years ago. I wonder what was happening. And so just thought it was really interesting to get their perspectives on who it was that they were following and how they wanted to engage with that community. I loved them being able to engage with all of the panelists that we were able to have and like seeing them ask questions and get answers because I often think that one of my favorite things about Twitter is how much I've learned on Twitter just from like other scholars and other people from other disciplines. And so to watch them do that in real life was definitely a great experience.
Yeah. Well, and having purpose behind pedagogy, anything like you talked about with Twitter, like don't just have them do busy work. And if from a project that takes them 2 weeks to do to a tweet, make sure that is super intentional. And then the Dolly Parton challenge, that was all you bringing that to the course. I was like, yes, I need relevancy right now. I'm feeling my age more and more. But that's another way to approach what sometimes we first talk just about intent versus impact, but then going back to our authenticity conversation and how we navigate around that and how we show up on social. Because also like there's this idea of, are you being performative? Are you, posting for the right reasons? But then further this audience idea, and it challenged me too, to think more of like the awareness piece of, because sometimes we can approach that with fear. Like, what do people think of what I'm posting? Or am I going to get criticized? Always trying to approach this with just like an awareness, a reflection of what currently is. So, well, I love being able to teach with you. And it was all completely online. So luckily we were already good to go in transitioning that course in June. Well, so tell us about where you are in your doc program and if there are a couple topics that you are dancing around, potentially digging deeper for your dissertation.
Yes, so I am wrapping up my coursework fairly soon, hoping to potentially take prelims in May, and then I would have one more class to take. So we have a goal of spring 2022. So we are gonna knock on wood, but also like I have a fantastic advisor, and as soon as I told her this is my goal, she was like, okay, well, you need to do this and this timeline, and so love her. In terms of my topics that I'm kind of floating around and having out there, it's actually very relevant, but I'm really interested in what our undergraduate students' expectations are of institutional Twitter accounts. And so you will rarely see an institution who does not have some sort of representation on social media. And so really interested in what is the student expectation of that account, and what is it that they want from that person? Do they have the expectation to be talking to a real person? Do they have the expectation that the things that they tweet at that account are being taken into consideration, and that they're, actually listening to those things? But then also, what is the institution's purpose? So I'm really interested in what type of methods they're using. So is it dialogic or is it monologic? Are we using this as an announcement platform, or are we using this as a platform to truly engage our students and listen to our students and get to know about our students, even our audience, right? To go back to our audience conversation. So recognizing there's a lot of different stakeholders that get insights from an institutional account. So, you could have people that are alumni and have graduated from the institution many years ago, or folks who are just fans of the athletic team. Like, who is the audience that the institution is interested in pushing their message out to or engaging with, and how do those things align? How does that I don't want to use the word impact. How does that impact influence the relationship between students and their institution? And I was interested in it before, but now I'm like even more interested because we've been spending all of this time online. I think students expectations might have changed, right? Of like, maybe in the beginning, it wasn't that big of a deal for their institution to have a good social media presence, and maybe they followed them and maybe they didn't. But now with COVID and so much being online and so much communication being digitally, maybe that has now shifted, and maybe vice versa for institutions, right? Maybe they were not very passionate about what their presence looked like and what the expectations were for students, and now maybe they are. So I'm somewhere along those lines of what is that relationship between the students and the institution.
I love that. I think that is such a missing ingredient in being able to tell the full story of social, but also understanding our students from not just the user data, because you can get all kinds of data on the back end, or look at vanity metrics like, oh, well, we have this must be what students want because this type of content does well. And that's also just me as a qualitative researcher. I don't know what your methods are going to be, but if you, ignore this completely because that you get lots of advice in your, but if you could create some kind of model or framework different institutions could take, even if it was like a focus group or like survey, in order to answer even that really simple question, like what do students really actually want from the institution's Twitter account? Or I also think Instagram, trying to navigate in that space, or, I don't think we need to go into TikTok quite yet, but and I think this would be applicable for campus leaders too, because when they ask me, well, what should I post about for students? I'm like, have you ever asked them like what they think of your Twitter, or if they're, or why they're not connected with you? Like, they'll be honest. So, maybe that's why you have somebody else ask, but you have to ask those blatant questions if that's who you actually want your audience to be. So I'm very excited for that research.
Me too. It'll be a fun time. And they always say do something that you're passionate about. And so I'm like, I'm on Twitter half the time anyway. So.
I think that Twitter, if we look, I sometimes look at different apps with, they're almost their own culture, and the evolution of those that are drawn to those platforms, they're also changing how we each use a tool. And especially for traditional age college students, their usage tends to also do big kind of backflips sometimes. So interesting to navigate around there. So I think my next question, I think it's related to a course that you're in, or maybe it's me just wanting to figure out what you're up to, is that you created this brand called Pineapple's Purpose plus P. So yeah, it's on Twitter. I think it's on Instagram. The description is affirming and amplifying the authentic expression and communal support of the personalities, intentions, ambitions of millennial Black women. So tell us more.
It is absolutely 4 course. Not that it's not important, but it is absolutely for a discipline course that I'm taking this spring. So again, we're trying to get done. So we did take on an additional course this spring, and that we were tasked with creating 3 platforms and creating some intentional content around those areas. And for me, I was like, okay, well, I'm not just going to create something that doesn't look good or doesn't have as all students should do their work, to do their best, not just to get the grade. And so I created that one because I'm obsessed with pineapples. So it really fits. And for people that are looking for a deeper reason, there is not one. there is, everyone's like, is there a deep reason about quotes about pineapples? And I'm like, y'all just don't understand. I just like pineapples. You can probably count them in my background at this point. Oh. But really felt like it was, but also that was the part of that authenticity, right? Of I really like pineapples. It's very much a part of who I am. My whole house is decorated in that way. I have a pineapple tattoo. And so it really fits with why not do something that I just like. But also purpose was really about I am really passionate about making sure that I'm doing something that is fulfilling whatever my purpose is, whether, and recognizing that your purpose can change and it can be different for different audiences. And so really wanting to do something that uplifted Black women. I feel like it's such an interesting place to be, where I'm not an undergraduate student, but I'm not quite 30 yet. And so knowing that there are so many Black women who have very similar voices and very similar experiences. And so how can I build a platform that talks about the things that I'm very passionate about, but also brings other people in? And so we were kind of tasked with talking about, we're tasked in the class to at least come up with about 2 weeks worth of content, which technically my 2 weeks are up. But again, I don't have to do things. So I'm not just going to put it out there and drop it. But I've really focused on that platform on little victories, which was inspired by my current grad assistant, because we were just really feeling the feels of COVID. And it was really hard to celebrate that, okay, but we are doing really great work, in a really not so fun time. And so encouraging people to celebrate, what are those little victories that are happening in our lives right now? Because as much as things suck, there are also areas where we can celebrate right now. And then have also done a lot on promoting Domestic Violence Awareness Month, which is something that I'm really passionate about, having lost my instructor in high school to domestic violence. And so really wanting to make sure that folks understand the impacts of that. And then I've just been doing a lot of running. So for some reason, I decided to sign up for a virtual half marathon, which really does not sound like a lot of fun, but we're going to see how it's going to go. But also recognizing that my wellness has been something that I've been really committed to. And as a person that is working full time and also going to school right now full time, it is very hard to commit to that. And so encouraging folks to make sure that we're still taking care of ourselves in that time. So it's a really exciting project. It's teaching me a lot about content creation and engaging my audience and those types of things. Because, my other platforms have just been Pearson, and it's whatever is at the top of my mind at the moment, whether it is Saw or higher education.
Saw? So scary movie Saw?
Yeah, that's been my goal for the October, is to watch all of the Saw movies, which I used to, yeah.
Oh my God, I wouldn't make it.
I think I'm
under the bed.
4. I think I'm up to 4, maybe 5. But yeah, it's a really eerie series, and it gets real strange.
I mean, I'll watch Hocus Pocus. That's about it.
Which is also a great Halloween movie. I have also watched Hocus Pocus and Halloween Town. I have definitely done that, but I was also like, I'm gonna watch all the songs because that's where I am.
Power to you. I'm a
Yes,
big,
I'm
big
super
baby.
excited.
Well, when I saw those, because you reshared them, on your own Twitter page and your Instagram, I was like, I feel like if this is for a course, I love it. I want to kind of steal it, as we need to do in education, but be inspired by that it's actionable, right? We're not like writing these papers and projects that just kind of die in our Dropbox folders. And especially this summer, I say it every summer, but this summer, especially within the course we taught, I was like, please do your final project on something you need desperately to do in your job to, like do that digital engagement or that course you're going to teach. Make it applicable, please, please, please. So, and of course, I was not surprised that you put so much purpose behind it. It's also just an interesting exercise to, it's not like it's something bigger than you, but when it's not just centered around you. It's very much centered in purpose. And then you specifically state who it's for: Millennium Black women. And as we know, in digital platforms, you let your people know who it's for, and so they can identify with it. So I thought there was some cool things that you did there, even if it's just an exercise.
I'm sure it'll stick around. I put a lot of effort into it, so I'm sure it'll stick around.
Yeah, right. So I have one more question for you, and then if anyone has questions for us, feel free to drop them into the chat. So, I kind of joke with people, like, once I kind of like find you and I like you, but like we get each other, like we value, especially within technology, in higher education and social media, we have to find those people that really get it, to unify our voices, so it's not just like me in the bleachers just trying to I told you so. No, that was what we were joking, that we've been doing this whole time. But I pulled together a group of folks to help me with a Facebook group that I created last March to help, especially people in student affairs and enrollment, connect with people that do digital engagement and digital marketing work within like the social media marketing side of higher ed. So I basically tried to take my two networks that I've built over this last decade and put them in the same room, because we can't do that at NASPA because we all go to different conferences. So I was like, all right, we need to quickly learn from each other as we're all trying to transform our programs. And then later on, I added a number of people to help me be my advisors, my instigators, my crew behind that digital community called Higher Ed Digital Community Builders, and it's on Facebook. And if any of y'all are interested in how to build community online, I'm not saying we have a recipe for you, but we have a place where we're trying to problem solve and be supportive with you. And so you are part of that crew. Yes. And you've been part of some panels, and one in particular, and I don't know if you know this, but the panel that you helped organize earlier this fall was the most successful, well-attended, because it was also so timely, and the people that you brought together were amazing in being able to show up to talk about. So the topic was, how do you integrate advocacy in your digital communities? And you broke down and talked about how to amplify voices from marginalized identities, but also, talking about what is meaningful anti-racist strategies in online communities, from a Facebook group to an Instagram story to a Zoom room. Honestly, break it down however you define it. So for those of people watching that didn't get to tune in yet, what were a couple of things that you took away as a moderator, again, getting this really powerhouse panel together, and why we honestly need to keep probably doing that panel over and over every other month?
Yeah. Well, one, the panelists were just fantastic in finding some folks to be able to talk. It was, going back to the purpose of Pineapple's Purpose and Pea, was they're all Black women. And that was not something that I intended to do. But once it happened, I was like, oh, this is gonna be lit. This is gonna be great. And so it was a fantastic conversation. Really enjoyed engaging with all of them. I think some of the things that I took away from it were really just the acknowledgement of like there are people behind our platforms, and there are people behind the messages that we're putting out, the ways that we're engaging with people. I always really love to meet and talk to the person that is either running the Twitter, running the Facebook, running the social media, because they have so many interesting insights into how students are feeling, what they're doing, how they're interpreting their message. They're really doing a lot of that listening, and can help you and can probably give you a lot of insight on how your message is going to do before it even goes out. And so the importance of listening to those folks, yes, listening to your audience, listening to your students, but also listening to the people who are running your accounts, and maybe asking them, how do you think that this is going to go over? How do you think that people are going to respond? And so really hearing from them tell stories of like, yeah, I knew that wasn't going to go well when we put it out there. And I wish that folks would have listened. And so I think that that was a really, really valuable takeaway from that, especially when those voices behind the platforms are people of color, Black, Indigenous people of color, really understanding that like, well, all the responses to your message are now coming back to this person, and how do we take care of ourselves, and how do we make sure that we are separating, the responses from ourselves versus the response to the institution. And so really just having that collective care around those people is really important. And then the other really big takeaway that we talked about was really being cognizant that our students or whoever our audience is can handle multiple messages at a time. That we had a good conversation about, for a while the entire conversation was about anti-racist work and how much we love and care and how much we want to be there for one another. And then the conversation like shifted to like, okay, we need to tell you about move-in and all of these really important things. And it was like, this conversation is over. And those conversations don't end for Black, Indigenous people of color. It's a consistent conversation. And so recognizing that our audiences absolutely have the capacity to handle multiple messages. So we can talk about move-in, but we also can still talk about this anti-racist initiative or this diversity and inclusion initiative. And so recognizing that like, it doesn't have to be like we got to talk about this right now, and then we'll come back, and we can do like multiple things at a time. So it was great to talk to them and also like talk through, mistakes that institutions have made, whether it's, a photo that doesn't belong to you that maybe you should not use as a representation of your institution, or how a message came about and it was a message that only went on social media, but it didn't go out via an email, and we didn't do anything else after that message happened, or making sure that, again, that conversation is consistent. So we talked about, when George Floyd was murdered, there were a lot of statements put out, but again, this has not ended for us. This is a consistent thing. And so really highlighting how it can't just be a one-time statement and then we move away from it. So I definitely did not know it was one of the most watched, but it does make me really happy because I thought that those women really dropped some important pieces of information that everyone should go watch and listen and take it all in. And then I agree with you, Josie, that it should definitely be something that is consistently, talked about, because it's going to change, even since having that conversation, I actually went back and rewatched it, and I was like, wow, this just filled me up so much more all over again. But one of the things that we talked about was, all these messages were happening and we hoped that they were authentic, but then the next time something happens, no one said anything. And I know even for me, when Breonna Taylor was murderers were not held accountable, no one said anything. And so it's like these things are consistent in the lives of Black, Indigenous people of color. And so our conversations really need to be consistent. Otherwise, it's just performative and it's not real and it's not making an impact. And so what's the purpose then, if we want to take it back to the purpose conversation of what is the purpose of the message that you're putting out? Are you trying to engage in authentic conversation and move towards real social change, or are you trying to check the box that said, I said something, so now I get my sticker and can move on? Because that's not enough.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think the format, the dialogue that you were able to facilitate is, as educators, as leaders online, as digital community builders, you don't have to be the expert in being able to facilitate and use your position, your power, your resources to allow to amplify voices that know more than you, that have different experiences on the internet. I have found that speaks volumes, not just the quote or the sticker that you post, but the people that you are featuring and giving time and space. And like you said, it's not just doing this right now and that's it. It's got to be consistent. And so I know we're all just trying to stay afloat right now, but thinking back, like, how do we just make this a through line of all the work that we do? Well, Pearson, I appreciate you so much for jumping on, for being willing to be in the book. I'm so glad you finally got your book.
I'm pumped. Thank you.
I mean, all the reading that you have to do right now, like it'll come, right? Like,
it's okay. I'm in, I was telling somebody I'm in lit review now. So this is now the time.
Oh, okay, great. So some of those references will be helpful for you. Just like flip to the reference section, and this. So this is you're talking about, like, anyone can read this, right? Not just in higher ed, but the way this publisher works is the same like your dissertation, right? You have to use APA. So there's all, like, to my dad, he's like, what's all these like letters and numbers after all these sentences? I was like, oh, it's basically, like you're quoting someone. You have to make sure that you prove,
Yeah, absolutely.
Stuff cited. I was like, you can just jump over it. Don't worry about it. That's for people like Pearson and I. Oh, I love it. Well, again, thank you for jumping on. Appreciate you. And I'm sure we will talk very, very soon.
Well, thank you for having me. I've enjoyed our conversation.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Always so good to catch up with Pearson and the course that we taught, and wishing her lots and lots of luck through her program. I feels like I just graduated with my doctorate, but it was over 5 years ago, and we know what it takes. So send her some good love, and I can't wait to get her research out into the world. So y'all, thank you for joining us today for another episode of this book club for the book that just came out, Digital Leadership in Higher Education. I would love to know if you checked, if you've picked up your book either digitally or you're getting it mailed to you. That is so cool to see it getting out into the world. And I will continue doing this live stream series Tuesdays at 4 p.m. Eastern Central Time. Next week, I will be joined by Russell Lowry Hart. He is the president of Amarillo College, and I absolutely am such a fan of his in how he describes his work as an educator, as a human, and as a college president through the lens of love. So I will hope you will join us then. And thank you for joining today. I hope y'all have a good week. We will see you in a week. If you watch Saw, if you watch Hocus Pocus like me, get a little bit of Halloween spirit maybe during these very interesting times. All right, y'all take care. Bye.